Welcome to the vgMastersClub. I'm Hagen Dragmeyer. Today we're going to cover emulation gaming versus console gaming. This is a huge debate among gaming fans whether the quality versus the accessibility of console gaming to emulation gaming. Now, everything I'm going to cover today, I actually own the carts and have a ROM, so that way I can compare side to side and see which one's better. With today's gaming, as it evolves and we get better and better graphics, the emulation of older consoles is becoming more and more popular with fans of the gaming industry. As consoles are becoming more and more retro and classic, it's becoming harder and harder for classic gamers to locate and affordably find games for their old school consoles, such as Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis. What's that leading to is that they're going online and downloading the ROMs, and that way you have an extra copy of the game. It leads to a lot of controversy and piracy in the gaming industry. Now, your views aside of the legality of the subject, I'm just going to get into the technical aspects and explain pros and cons of console gaming versus emulation gaming. First off, I'm going to talk about CPU emulation. Back in the early 90s, when emulation was still in its infancy, you would play Nintendo and there would be noticeable slowdown, there would be flickering of graphics, things of that nature. As computers have advanced, the emulation is becoming a lot more flawless, and the controls are becoming a lot closer to replicating the console. Now, in my opinion, playing the actual console is still the best way to enjoy a game. But emulation is a great secondary solution if you don't feel like hooking up your old system, don't have all the extra power supplies to hook up 1,000 systems. All you need is a computer, one power supply, and you're good to go. So for simplicity's sake, I would say emulation wins over console gaming. As for collectability's sake, I would say console gaming is way above emulation gaming. I mean, you may have the whole gotta collect every single ROM offline mentality, but there's nothing like actually holding a cartridge of your favorite game in your hands and plugging that game in, playing it, mastering it on the actual console. Even though CPU emulation has advanced, I still find an issue with the controls. You'll have games that'll, depending on how taxing it is on your CPU and how advanced the gaming emulation is, the controls are going to be a little spotty. You may have a spot where the controls don't respond as they would on a console. You also get slowdown. In my opinion, it's just not as flawless as you would have in console gaming. With systems like Nintendo, where it's hit or miss finding a classic game that has very responsive controls, it can make a game seem way worse and unplayable on an actual emulation as compared to the console version, which is a lot more enjoyable and you can play for a lot longer periods of time. Now, emulation sound in some instances can be spotty as well, leading to blips in the sound and not a smooth, flawless gaming experience. Console gaming, you're subjected to how the actual programmer wanted to show up on Nintendo. Of course, another newer way of emulation is the next generation consoles being hacked and allowed to play an emulator on that console. For example, the PlayStation Portable, you can put a custom firmware on it, allow you to run old Nintendo games, Super Nintendo games, Game Boy Advanced, etc. And I find that this type of emulation is usually a little more smoother than CPU emulation, but you still have the errors of using a ROM compared to a cart. If the ROM was ripped poorly or was incomplete, you'll still have the blocky graphics, the blips in the sound, etc. There's always the possibility that you could find an updated ROM without these blips, but it's kind of hard to sift through all the files you find online to find that proper ROM. Another console emulation that I've been familiar with is the Nintendo Wii. This is my preferable way of playing emulation, as the When you're playing, say for example, Nintendo, you're using a Nintendo controller as opposed to a computer controller or your keyboard as you would on a computer. Using the Nintendo controller is much more responsive, and there's a lot less hiccups and errors in the emulation, leading to a much more flawless gaming experience. In conclusion, I prefer console gaming over emulation gaming tenfold. But as for convenience and not having to plug in as many wires, emulation is an acceptable form of gaming.